Welcome to Burning River Radio. I'm your host, Joe Coblitz, and I am joined, as always, by Justin Lada.
Yo.
Whole lot of Lada. And I just wanted to say that I think John Belushi said it best when he said, "I hate Illinois Nazis." Do you get that reference?
That's an excellent quote, whoever said it.
Do you know who John Belushi is?
I do. His brother, Jim Belushi.
Okay, he's the dead one. Yeah, he's the dead one.
Yeah, the Blues Brothers, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's from Blues Brothers.
Yeah. Finally, a reference we're on the same page about.
See, I'm not sure because we had these discussions, and some of them are after the show, so people will have no clue what we're talking about.
True.
But I had mentioned ELO, and you said you never heard of them before. And so I brought up like 6 songs, and you'd heard of one of the songs. And then you quoted one of the songs the other day on Twitter, and it bugged me. Now that you're trying to like own something you don't know anything about.
One song I told you I knew. It's the one I knew.
Yeah, so I just think it's funny, and this is not entirely baseball related, but it gets into it. Like, I remember when I was younger, I had pride in ignorance in some things. You know, like I didn't know about whatever. You claim you don't know about something because it's hipster or cool or whatever to not know that about whatever something is. But at this point in my life, I'm trying to kind of
not be ignorant.
Embrace everything and just see everything. And it's not just that. It's like it mostly in pop culture things. Like, and you do that. You pull this, and that's why it brought it to my mind. Is you've made it very obvious that you don't watch Game of Thrones and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's your intention, like you're bragging that you've avoided this TV show that's probably the greatest TV show I've ever seen in my life.
I'm not really bragging. You know, I just have no interest. But go on.
Yeah, but people do that shit all the time, and it bugs me because there are things that I haven't seen that are considered great works of film or whatever. Like I've never seen The Godfather because I don't really like Italian mob stuff, but at least I know what's going on in there, and if I see a reference to that somewhere, I get the reference.
Yeah. There are certain things in pop culture most people are going to get.
Well, but I don't think they do, and I'm trying now. I have to remember what was a podcast conversation, what was real life. I was talking to Jeff Rich the other day, who we're doing the Greetings from Goodyear podcast now, and I believe it was with him. And I said something like somebody posted that from Animal House quote again. It gets posted all the time. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? And every time somebody posts, was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Within the first 3 replies are, the Germans didn't bomb Pearl Harbor. The guy who doesn't get the reference, because obviously that's a John Belushi line from Animal House. Which you get that, no? You've seen Animal House?
It's been a while.
Okay, at least you've seen it at some point in time. Yeah, so it's a great movie, and everyone should see it. And like, I feel like you should get these references, and when I see people don't get a reference or take things seriously and get mad about it, I'm like, well, don't just pretend like the world started existing the moment that you were born, essentially. And I feel that, and I can turn it to baseball a little bit there. It's the exact same way. When people talk about, I've seen people, and I've said it too, in ways that the current Indians pitching rotation is the greatest pitching rotation ever in team history. And every time I see someone say something like that, I go, no, it's the greatest since about 1968. Because that rotation in the let's say from 65 through about 69, 70, that Sonny Siebert, Sam McDowell, Louis Tiant was the greatest ever in 68. Those guys there, they may have been better than the Indians rotation in the 50s that featured 3 Hall of Famers and Mike Garcia. And it may have been better than the pitching rotation in the 1910s that featured before the 1900s, I guess they would be, that featured Addie Joss and Earl Moore and a few other guys that had ERAs. There were like 3 guys on the starting rotation who had an ERA below 1.5, I believe.
Jeez.
Back in the dead ball era. So, and you have to have some sense of history. The world did not start the day you were born. You should know some of what's going on beforehand in everything, in movies and music and baseball. I just felt like that was necessary. Because if you don't know, I'll say, I mean, I know a ton of ELO music, and I love them. And I think they're one of my favorite, probably top 10 bands ever. But they didn't make a hit after I was born. So it's not like, I mean, you're, 5 years younger than me or something, but it's not like they were popular when I was a kid and they weren't popular when you were a kid. There's something you have to go find.
Well, I mean, there's certain things that just transcend. I mean, I like Aerosmith. I like, stuff that's transcended, like Michael Jackson.
And
I have
I
no
think
idea where we're
most
going with this, but
most people like the Beatles and stuff. There are a few bands that made it through, but I feel like you should still really almost go out of your way to read stuff from before you were born, to watch stuff. One of the first Burning River Book Club things I did was on Ball 4.
That's a great book.
Ball 4 at this point is, I would say, 100% outdated. You're not going to learn anything from it because the stuff he talks about in that book is on Twitter now. It's on ESPN. It's on TMZ Sports or whatever. I don't know. I don't watch that show. I'll claim ignorance on TMZ Sports. I've never seen an episode of it. But I know what they do. And or Deadspin. That's what Andre Knott always says, stay off Deadspin.
Yeah, don't.
So the stuff that they covered. What?
Don't end up on Deadspin.
Yeah, so the stuff they covered in Ball 4 is stuff that would end up on Deadspin now. But you still have to read it because at the time that stuff was never in the public's eye until Jim Bouton put it out there. All right, so we made it from Belushi to Bouton. I think that's that's enough. So the Indians have a doubleheader tomorrow, which probably, maybe you're listening to this between them. I don't know. It'll come out around that time anyway. Against the Twins, they're playing. They got rained out on what is today? Wednesday. So they're playing a doubleheader on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question on Twitter about options, and I just want to go over this real quick because I feel like there's no reason. All baseball fans should understand pretty much all the contractual rules at this point. And so there shouldn't be questions like this unless you're 14 and you just like the infield fly rule the other day. There was a fly ball. I can't even remember what team it was that the Indians were playing against. You remember Tampa Bay, or was it before then?
It was before Tampa Bay. I think it was the series. It was the Colorado series.
Against Colorado, there was a fly ball to shortstop, in front of shortstop, and they let it drop, and they ended up getting a double play on it because Zimmer didn't run out to first. That was the play.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of fans were saying, why isn't that an infield fly? And the answer is because it's only an infield fly if there's runners on first and second. If there's just a runner on first, it's not. Because essentially, you're expecting the runner to run. If he had ran, then they would have just got one out. You're trying to avoid giving a team a double play by cheating. Now, I personally think the infield fly rule is stupid. Let them cheat. If you think you can drop that ball and you can get 2 outs, go for it, because maybe you won't. There's no guarantees. So I'd rather, let it go. But that's the rule. Is the intention is you can't trick somebody into a double play, and you shouldn't be able to be tricked if you are the hitter, because you should be running, not hanging out at home plate. For the option thing, when the season begins,
you can Google any of this, by the way.
If you know
how to use the internet or on Twitter, You can literally Google this stuff. That's what's
Yeah,
nice about it.
you can Google anything, but people ask on Twitter, so I try to answer to decrease the amount of ignorance in the world. If people know a little bit more, when the season starts, if you're not on the major league roster, the 25-man roster, but you are on the 40-man roster, you have used an option. Because the question in this case was Ryan Merritt, who's going to start the second game. So Merritt already used his option for this season. After the first day of the year, options no longer matter at all for the whole season for Ryan Merritt. He already used his option. That was it.
Uh-huh.
You get one option for the entire season. You usually get 3, sometimes 4 options for your career where you can be kept in the minors. So that's why we talked about this on Chum Show at some point about Francisco Mejia. When they put Francisco Mejia on the 40-man roster, he had to use an option. He's not even in AAA, and he already used up one of his options. Now, the hope is that because he's such a good hitter, that once they bring him up, he'll be up for good.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you never know exactly what's going to happen.
I would, and on top of that, Merritt was called up during the Minnesota series earlier in the year. He was not the 26th man during the doubleheader they had, so he used the option that he was. Even if he didn't use the spring option, before he got set down in spring training, it would have been used anyway. So it's not new. But yeah, it's amazing how many people we go over this. I don't know how many times a year. People are like, how many options are they going to burn on him? Well, it's one a year. I mean, this comes up. This literally comes up almost every time someone gets called up.
And with the current Indians roster, it's not necessarily perfect, but their 40-man roster is pretty stacked. And you really don't expect them to DFA players. Like they had a DFA Daniel Robertson when they signed where they traded for Jay Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Robertson was very expendable
to get Joe Smith.
What's that?
They DFA'd Percy Garner to bring on Joe Smith.
Yeah, and of course they brought Garner back in
on a minor league deal. Yeah,
which you're allowed to do as long as nobody else claims him off of waivers.
Right.
So
that's how DFA exposes. I mean, if we're on this subject, I guess.
Yeah.
DFA exposes every year a player to all 29 other teams. Any one of them can claim him and take him if you DFA a player.
Yeah, for their current salary, which is why, again, another question that's constantly asked: why did Justin Verlander clear waivers? Because if you claim him on waivers, you have to pay his entire salary. And it's not just a trade thing. If you claim him and the Tigers said, okay, you can have him, this is revocable waivers, where they could also say, no, you can't have him. That's not the same as a DFA.
Yeah, there's no.
Which is irrevocable.
There's no. I was just kidding.
Yeah, so if somebody claimed him, and the Tigers would be like, yes, you can have him, because when you sign these multi-million, hundreds of $1 million deals, you're really going for their younger years. You're not going for the later years. If you sign a guy for 6 seasons when he's 30, you really want years 30 through 33 or 30 through 34. You don't want those next couple of years. So to claim a guy like that on waivers when they're in the final years of what is probably an escalating contract and guaranteed money would be really stupid.
This is why, if you remember, oh boy, it was a couple years ago now, Boston and the Dodgers made that mega trade where I think Josh Beck and Adrian Gonzalez made it to the Dodgers, and I have no idea who the Red Sox got in return. And Carl Crawford went to the Dodgers as well. All those guys had just ridiculous amounts of money. Obviously, they're all heavy contracts.
Well, that one bugged me at the time, and the commissioner could have denied it, and he allowed it to go through. But it was an obvious salary dump by Boston, and I really wish they would have made him stay with it. I hate when a team gets away with that.
It worked.
What?
That's why it happened in August, and it worked though because of all the money that was involved.
Yeah, I just hate, and the Indians did it with Swisher and Bourne. For people who don't remember, 2 years ago. It's 2015. They dumped Swisher Born for
Chris Johnson and
Chris Johnson.
they sent a bunch of money to Atlanta to cover the contracts, and they agreed.
And it was like in the first week of August. And ultimately, what they should have done is just release Swisher, kept Bourne for another couple months, and then released him too. And the money probably would have been the same. But
and I mean,
instead, they'll play Chris
Johnson this year.
Yeah, they got to pay him his option next year too. So it's
really?
like another. I think it's a $1 million buyout next season that they have to pay him.
Well, it was worth it, obviously, to get those guys off the roster, but.
Well, I was just saying it wasn't worth it because they could have just cut him, and it would have been the exact same.
The same thing, yeah, I guess. But you do it for a little bit of salary relief in the short term, and you rid the Braves long term, I guess. With
all right. So anyway, the Indians picked up somebody off of a waiver trade. Should probably mention him. Jay Bruce came in, and all he's done is doubles since he's been on the team.
And played some pretty good defense in right field, I would say.
Yeah, and I'll say in previous years, his name has always been brought up, and the Indians front office admitted that they've been interested in him every year the last few seasons. And I always was vehemently against it because of his defense. And it turns out that he was actually injured the last couple seasons.
Yeah,
and I talked to I talked to a Reds fan the other day, and he was saying that back when like Jay Bruce was in Dayton, he was like a star center fielder, and he was actually a really good defender. And it's not until recently that this whole defense thing has even come up. So if he can keep playing the way he is right now, he's going to be your starting right fielder pretty much every single day through the rest of the year and beyond.
Well, I think obviously the fact that, well, I mean, we still haven't heard anything about Brantley other than he's in a walking boot and there's no timetable, but the fact that they're going to have, when I saw they reported that Chisenhall would potentially play some third base and then obviously some left field on rehab, that pretty much signified that Bruce was going to be the everyday right fielder. He's going to stay there.
Yeah, and I'll honestly,
I'm okay with that.
The only thing I would say is if you don't have Brantley and you have Chisenhall and Bruce, I would prefer Bruce in left because I think he's got less mobility than Chisenhall at home, because that giant wall kind of, to me, it should make it easier to play left field. That's what has saved Brantley from looking bad, I believe, for the past 6 years.
Probably
is that giant wall makes it so you barely have to move as a left fielder. It made Albert Bell look great for 3-4 years in the mid-90s. I never thought Bell was a bad defender, and then the stats are out now that he was one of the worst left fielders in team history. But I never, like at the time, I never noticed it. It wasn't like he was missing balls all the time. And I think it was because that really decreases the amount of distance you have to cover. So I'd put Bruce in left, but obviously he's the big money man and that veteran leader that they always have wanted. So you got to go with what he wants to.
Yeah, I'm not sure who plays on the wall best, because I don't think at this point we're going to see Brantley until September. So you don't got to worry about a roster decision with him. The only thing that's going to be weird with Brantley is, I don't think by the time he's probably ready to go and come back, there might not be any rehab games left for him to play. You might see him down in Arizona, because by the time he's ready to start working back, the minor league season might be over.
Yeah, they've done that before. I saw Danny Salazar play down here last year. It's not ideal.
Playoffs, yeah.
It's really not great to be relying on either, essentially instructional league games at that point.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they're going to work that. I really don't know who should play left field when they're all healthy. Obviously, you would think Brantley, but
no, I would go with Brantley if they all are healthy. And I think the funny thing is you got all these left-handed hitters now,
which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Most pitchers are right-handed, but with all the struggles they've had against lefties this year and for the past few years, they kept going, look for the right hand. We want the right-hander. We got Edwin now. And then they bring in Bruce, who's just another big lefty.
Yeah, well, okay. Bruce is not terrible against left-handers, so he's not great, but he's not terrible. Brantley's fine against lefties. Chisnall's actually been better against lefties this year than he ever has been. So it's less of a problem, but you also have Geyer and Jackson. And there's obviously a lot of talk right now that people think that when Chisenhall's back, maybe Zimmer goes down and you platoon Jackson and Chisenhall in center and or just put Jackson in center, Chisenhall in left, and Bruce in right, which is not exactly a great defensive outfield, but it sounds like a lot of people think that they're going to demote Zimmer. I'm not really sure I'm on board with that, just for the fact I saw you and Gavin having the same conversation today about they prevent enough runs that not having Zimmer in center field, they can out-hit those mistakes.
Yeah, and Gavin's always right about everything, so you better not come to him with an opinion. That's I do think, and my point on that was, before I ended it with a joke, my serious point was that the Indians are on pace to break their team. They have the AL record for most strikeouts in a single season from, I think, 2014. And they're on pace to beat that and then have another 10 to 20 games left to add to it. So this team
is legally in strikeouts, though.
No, the funny thing is Houston is going to break their record first, and well, not necessarily. They're catching up on Houston. The last time I checked, they had made up considerable ground, so they could beat Houston to break their own record. But they're up right with them. Anyway, they're striking out guys essentially like no team ever has before. When you do that, you decrease the importance of defense. And when they're going into so many of these games and only scoring a couple runs, if Zimmer does not improve, which I don't think is necessarily the case, I think he very well could improve by the end of the season. But if he doesn't, then I could definitely see an argument for doing that platoon in center so you can get your regular starters in left and right.
I'm probably on board with that. Well, in September, though, it doesn't matter. In September, you can leave Zimmer on the bench and go with that alignment and just put Zimmer in for defense late in the game.
Yeah, and I will say I don't think either Miesel or Bastian had said today that it shouldn't matter when Brantley's return shouldn't affect the roster, which means that he'll be back after September 1st. Right. If that's the case, they'll dump Almonte to bring back Chisenhall.
Right.
And Zimmer will stay on the team the entire year, which he should. I don't see a reason to send Zimmer back to AAA. It just doesn't. Like I get that he's struggling.
How is his slump going to get fixed in AAA? People say rebuilding confidence, but you're going to rebuild confidence against garbage pitching. What's the point?
And what did he go 0 for 30?
He's 0 for 28 with 16 strikeouts or 29.
Okay, but the fact is that 0 for 30 is such a misleading thing because a pitcher doesn't go 0 for 30. Anybody can get a hit. It's obviously there's some bad luck, random variation going on here.
Yeah, he's hit the ball hard. He had a sac fly in the Tampa series.
Yeah, it's not just a talent issue. It's not a he's pressing. It's mental. Because it's mental for a pitcher or Michael Martinez, and they're still getting more hits than that in that span of time. So I think it really is just a random variation. It could happen to almost anyone, not anyone. If you don't strike out that much, it's not going to happen to you. But I've seen better hitters take 0 for 20s, and it just it sucks. But you got to deal with it, and you got to go through it. It's going to happen. If you flip a coin an infinite amount of times, at some point it's going to come up heads 20 times in a row. It's not probable, but at some point it's going to happen.
Right.
So, I think that's a large part of what is happening here. It's not just him being bad. Again, and I think
he's worked walks. He has the sac fly, and he still plays great defense in center.
Yeah. So by the time the playoffs come around, I think you're talking about something completely different. And I know you love Austin Jackson. You just wrote something about him on BurningRiverBaseball.com.
Yes, read that because I actually found out things I didn't know before. So
Okay, I'm not as in love with him as you are, but I guess he's better than Geyer this season in particular. So if you're going to keep, if for whatever reason they can only keep one right-handed outfielder on the bench, so let's in the playoffs, you know, if they're keeping, you've got Brantley, Zimmer, Chisenhall, Bruce, uh, and Jackson. That's 5 outfielders. You really want to keep 6 outfielders?
in the playoffs, I don't know. I feel like
I could see him being the odd man out.
This is why Chisenhall is going to play left field, and he's going to play third base again in the minors on rehab, and they're talking about first base as well. Not that he should ever have to play first base because Santana's plenty fine there, but in the playoffs, if he's on the bench, and that's going to be the other thing is, I mean, if we want to get into this, I know I said I want to talk about it, but you didn't seem really super interested in the topic, but you know, if you're going to carry 6 outfielders, which it wouldn't shock me if they do, because I think this kind of makes up for, or you're trying to guard against having Michael Martinez bat in a key spot again, because you're going to have.
Well, and not just, you could say Martinez. There's no way Martinez is ever on this team again.
No, but I'm saying you're trying to avoid a similar situation where.
But I'm telling you, the guy you're trying to avoid is Roberto Perez and Jan Gomes, the
right,
2 guys, or Giovanni Urshela, or whatever. You know, like, you don't want any of those 3 guys hitting in any playoff game. So if you have 2 catchers on the roster, you know, which they'll have those 2 guys, and you have 6 outfielders, I don't think you're going to be platooning outfielders. I think you're going to be platooning those outfielders with those catchers.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, that's why I'm not so sure. Like, I was thinking about the other day, and I'm going to write something about it eventually. You know, I can see the point you want to take all 6 outfielders because you want good options on the bench. You want to have Geyer there to face a left-hander. You want to have Jackson there to face a left-hander or pinch run, even though he's a little fragile if you pinch run him because you don't know what might happen. But like you said, you don't want Gomes or Perez up in a key spot in a playoff game. But here's my only drawback with this is you only have one chance the entire game to pinch hit for those guys. So you're not going to need all of them. I mean, are you going to, okay, let's say if they go with the usual infield, which is Santana, Kipnis, Lindor, and Ramirez. Well, you're not pinch hitting for any of them. I mean, I guess you could maybe pinch it for Kipnis, but I'd be kind of surprised if they did that, I guess, unless you really
honestly,
he's not back.
I'd be interested to see how much of this improved defense they go with, but keeping Urshela on the team and using him at third base late in games, moving Ramirez over to second. So I think then you could potentially pinch hit for Kipnis. But you're right. Most of the pinch hitting is either going to be catchers or outfielders. And the outfield stuff
have a platoon advantage and not have Gomes or Perez up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing about talking about both, I guess, September call-ups and playoff potential is another stupid thing on Twitter I saw. Somebody wanted to have Eric Gonzalez and Giovanni Urshela on the postseason roster. And maybe this is
someone stupid.
You are?
I'm someone stupid.
Okay.
Now, this is before they traded for Jay Bruce, mind you.
Okay. But I'm going to point out the flaw in this. They say, oh, you need somebody in case somebody gets hurt or whatever. Because obviously your starting lineup is going to play every single day. So the bench guys are not really important. Your bench guys in the postseason should have some sort of specialty. They should be a really great pinch runner or a really great defender or a really great hitter. Maybe, but they can't play the whole game enough to break into the starting lineup. And Gonzalez is none of those. His specialty is that he can play every single position on the diamond, which is very useful during the regular season when guys are getting days off. But you're not giving Francisco Lindor a day off in the postseason. That'd be insane. If Francisco Lindor gets hurt in the postseason, you're allowed to make a roster move.
Right.
You could
It just creates a problem during the game.
Yeah, you could then bring him up. So yeah, you just have to deal with that one game, and having one guy who can play utility infield, which is Ursula, and play Ursula at short or move Ramirez to short or second or first or wherever he needs to play. You could figure that out in that game, and then the next day make a roster move if you need to. So you never should carry an emergency infielder. And I feel like I feel the same way about Dan Otero, that there's no way he should possibly be on the postseason roster, and I think that could be where you get your sixth outfielder from, is by not bringing Dan Otero.
Yeah, that's the other part of the postseason roster you got to think about, because number one, the only reason I said having Urshela and Gonzalez is for late defense, for having Urshela at third and Ramirez the second, and you still have Gonzalez as a pinch running option. That's literally the only reason I would have Gonzalez in the roster is for pinch running, because he is the best. I think he's the best runner on the team that's not a starter.
No, so Zimmer's probably the best runner on the team, and then again, if you're talking about like best offense out there to start the game, and it's not Zimmer, you could be having Zimmer on the bench, and
yeah, that's obviously another plus. If he doesn't start, you have him as a weapon, as a pinch runner. You guarantee he gets on base that way because he pinch runs for someone who's already on base. But I guess the bullpen makes it interesting too, because in the first round, I think the way the schedule shakes out, you only need 3 starters. Am I right? Because of off days, you don't need a 4th starter in the first round.
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on how you want to play it out. At this point, the Indians' starting rotation is so good, and again, this is another thing I've meant to mention at some point in time. Last season, somebody said that preparing for this season's postseason, you want to have a guy like Otero or Mike Clevenger or Josh Tomlin in the bullpen in case your starting pitcher cuts his finger on a drone during the ALCS. Then you can have that guy. You could have Mike Clevenger come in and pitch 5 innings, instead of having to piecemeal it together with the entire bullpen like they did last year.
True.
And that got to me thinking, and I was like, well, if Carlos Carrasco wasn't hurt and Danny Salazar wasn't hurt, that wouldn't have even mattered.
Yeah, Bauer would have been in the bullpen probably.
Bauer wouldn't have even been pitching. So I don't think that that's an argument. I don't it isn't anymore. And if let's say Bauer was going to start that game for whatever reason, but Carrasco and Salazar were healthy, you'd put him on the DL the next day.
Right.
Or even before the game, because it happened in between games. You would have put him on the DL. You would not have had him come out and try to pitch that with a stitched up finger. You would have put him on the DL.
The alternative was like Sean Moramondo.
Yeah, so that's why. Merit. Yeah, that's why they didn't do that, because they couldn't do it. They didn't have the option. If everybody stays healthy this year, you don't need to do that. You can leave Mike Clevenger off of the postseason roster entirely, and just understand that maybe if something happens, you could bring him up. But you don't need Mike Clevenger to be on this postseason roster. You don't need Josh Tomlin to be on the postseason roster. You could go with 4 starters, leave them all as starters. I like that idea of using 4 starters in the. Well, I like the idea of sweeping the ALDS, but
true.
If you don't sweep it, I like the idea of using 4 starters so you don't kill Corey Kluber. Because honestly, that's why. You could probably come up with 20 reasons why they lost the World Series. One of them was because Corey Kluber pitched too many innings.
I would say that's probably highly up there because he was all they had to depend on. That would be one of the top reasons.
You can blame Abraham Almonte. Someone the other day was blaming John Lucroy.
That's weird.
I can't remember who that was either. I don't think it was one of our guys.
Well, okay, regardless, though, you're going to have, okay, I think Kluber and Carrasco are settled at number 1 and 2 for the playoffs. You're going to have either Salazar, Clevenger, or Bauer start the 3rd game. I would probably assume Salazar just.
And the problem with doing this in August is that things change a lot. If you had talked about last year's playoffs in August, you would have had Carrasco in there.
Right.
You might not have had Salazar, But you definitely would have had Carrasco because he didn't get hurt until after that.
Yeah, so these things could work themselves out because, as they always do, I mean, it just happened where they were talking about how long could they go the 6-man rotation. And then Tomlin got hurt, and that solved the problem.
And now what happens if Josh Tomlin comes back? He's going to come back.
Yeah.
And he has a tendency, when he's well rested, to pitch better.
Yeah.
So what if he comes back after this long layoff, has 2 weeks left in the season, makes 2 starts, and both of them are shutouts? Now all of a sudden you're going to have people clamoring for him in the postseason rotation.
Well,
I won't be fooled this time.
For me, if everybody else is healthy, I don't think Tomlin is in your rotation for the playoffs, and he just does not fit as a bullpen arm. He's just not a guy you would want out there because of his tendency to allow home runs and not strike guys out. So for me, he doesn't make the postseason roster if everyone's healthy, and he wouldn't have last year. I don't think. If you had Salazar, Kluber, Carrasco, and then Five-Finger Bauer, Tomlin probably doesn't pitch any games in the postseason. He probably is in the bullpen, I guess. But this year,
I think they would have kept him in the bullpen for sure.
Okay, but he wouldn't have started any games, more than likely.
No, and of course, then we wouldn't have had Merritt and his wonderful single appearance.
And he wouldn't have had all those gifts on his registry brought by fans, which was a great story.
Yeah.
And now everybody thinks that he is some sort of hero, which I guess he is for the Indians, but that one game has really overinflated his value for Indians fans, like Tyler Naquin too.
Hey, we can wrap this up here. Have you ever heard of Duster Males? It'll tie everything together.
Nope.
You've never heard of Duster Males?
No.
Duster Males, I can't say single-handedly, but was one of the driving forces that not only won the Indians the AL pennant, but won them the World Series in 1920. He was a rookie pitcher.
Read more history like you do.
He was a rookie pitcher. He came up really late in the season. He essentially didn't give up any runs. I feel like I should look up his numbers now. I don't know the exact numbers. I believe he did not give up a run in the World Series. Let me get this real quick. Okay, so he made 8 starts, had a 1.85 ERA, and this is pretty much coming out of the dead ball era. It's not really dead anymore. 1.85 ERA in 8 starts, 63 innings, 2 shutouts. And then in the postseason, oh, come on, now it's not working. In the postseason, he pitched in 2 games, 1 start. The 1 start was a complete game shutout. And the other appearance was 6.2 innings. And he didn't allow a run. He walked 6 and struck out 6 and allowed 6 hits. So he was instrumental in the Indians winning the 1920 World Series. And he should have been considered a hero, right? I mean, that's the definition. You come up, you've never pitched. He had pitched 11 games in relief in 1916. So he hadn't even been in the majors for 3 years. And it was still his rookie season. Actually, the next year would have probably still qualified as a rookie, 1921, because he only made the 8 starts. No, okay, that pushed him past the rookie limits. Was 1920. He was never good again the rest of his career. He was okay in 21, and he was terrible after that. And he retired after 26. He missed all of 23 and 24. And there's a point to that. And I believe from what I've read, he was a junk balling lefty.
Oh, wow.
He may have thrown a cut fastball. And in 1920, a cut fastball meant you had a razor blade in your glove. And you actually cut the ball. I believe he was one of those guys.
Oh.
And actually, that was made. It may have been illegal at the time, but they really started enforcing that stuff after Ray Chapman died. they really started enforcing the ball rules, because one of the reasons he died was because the ball was so dark you couldn't see it when Carl Mays threw it and hit him in the head. And so they really started enforcing those. After that, each team was only allowed to have one spitballer on the team. They were still allowed to have one if he was a spitballer before the rule was made. And the Indians was Jim Begbie Sr., who was also big in the 1920s. So obviously he didn't succeed after that. But my point is, very, very similar to Ryan Merritt.
Huh. This is why you should always know your history.
Yeah, and Gene Bearden, 1948, left-handed knuckleballer, started the one-game playoff against the Red Sox and won it. And then was better than Bob Feller in the World Series. Again, a lefty. I mean, and the Indians struggle against lefties all the time, especially these rookie lefties. A team will see the Indians come and they'll be like, okay, call up the rookie lefty. And actually, what's funny is I saw one of the Twins beat reporters today complain that the Indians were doing that with Ryan Merritt pitching the first game of the doubleheader. They said, well, the Twins struggle against lefties. Everybody struggles against lefties. There's not that many of them. They're difficult to hit.
True.
So Merritt may never be great again, but he definitely deserves everything he ever got, all the presents and all that, all the fun stuff, all the accolades that he got for beating the Blue Jays. And I remember when that happened and thinking, if they don't win this game, this thing could go 7 games and they might lose it, because they should have won it already. But because how beat up the pitching staff was, I was thinking, if this goes 7 games, they might lose it. And
that's what happened in the World Series.
Or if they win it, then they'll have nothing left to throw in the World Series. So, I mean, it was definitely a real thing. This year, hopefully it doesn't matter, because they can try to stay healthy.
Yeah, no line drive comebackers, the pitcher.
At least the starting rotation is healthy right now. I mean, Kipnis is probably hurt worse than he's putting on, and Brantley is, who knows if he's even going to come back this season.
Yeah, I really don't know. This was so vague. I guess the only thing I missed it. Like, I had to ask somebody else on Twitter, like,
oh, he hurt his ankle again.
Well, I know he hurt his ankle, but I mean, there was an update the other day, which I totally missed because it's been such a vague process.
Well, I think it's just that he's in a walking boot.
Right, he's in a walking boot. He saw a specialist, and there's no timetable for his return right now.
Yeah, at least Chisenhall is back playing rehab games finally. They had initially said he was like a couple days behind Kipnis, but Kipnis has been back for a bit.
For a week, yeah.
So he was obviously a little bit further behind than that. But honestly, Chisenhall, the fact that they have Bruce really eliminates a lot of those needs that Chisenhall filled.
You know what, though? It's not like it's a bad problem. I mean, again, they have an option for a pinch hitter, and if Chisenhall can play left, he can play third, he can play first, or
he can't play third. We've watched him play third for 4 years. He cannot play third base.
Correct, he can't.
You think he's gonna get? You think he got better at playing third base having not played it in 3 years?
That's another good point, actually. Well, and not that Ramirez couldn't use a day off, to be honest, but that's the other thing too. Is what's the point of him playing third? You're not going to put him there over Jose unless it's I mean, you're not going to do it in the postseason, that's for sure. So the versatility loses its value in the postseason because you're not going to put. I guarantee in the postseason they shouldn't do this. The only thing in the postseason you can risk, I think, is not having Zimmer in center field as far as for defensive purposes, because there's no way Chisenhall should or could play third base in a playoff game. Now, center field is a different story because he's done it and he's not a terrible outfielder. I mean, he might not be a great center fielder, but he's not a terrible outfielder.
I think it's mostly a speed issue with him. When he was playing third defensively, he didn't have great reactions. He has a great arm, so he was usually fairly accurate and can get it there quickly. But the problem was he couldn't come in on anything on the ground in front of him. It was almost a guaranteed hitter error.
Pretty much.
You really don't want that
going on. In the postseason, you're not going to do that. So the versatility angle kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the only way you can make this work is if he plays center field for a couple innings in the postseason, a game, and then if you have a lead, you pinch run Zimmer and put him in the center of the rest of the game, which is fine if you think he can handle it. I mean, as long as he doesn't go, game 6 Tyler Naquin on us, which I don't think he will.
You know what? I think this may just be them planning for anything that could possibly happen, because
that's
you
great.
never know what's going to happen, and they don't want to end up with Michael Martinez taking the last at bat. And I think that's kind of, because think about why Martinez was in the game, because they had Coco Crisp playing left field, and they needed somebody who could throw somebody out at home, so they had to pull out Crisp out of left field, or else he would have still been in the game. So they don't want that to happen again. They don't want Giovanni Urshela taking the last at bat of the World Series.
I guarantee that's exactly what it was, and that's great. Because you want to know what? In the past, this is not something this team would have done. This is not a decision they would have made. They would have waited out one of Brantley or Chisenhall to get healthy, because they would have said, well, there's no room on the roster with those two healthy for everybody to get at bats. Instead, they said, screw it. One of them's not going to be back till September. We will figure it out in the postseason, and we will just find a way to make it work.
And I will say,
maybe in the short term, they needed it.
Another Twitter thing, somebody got on me because I said Mark Shapiro never went all in. And they said, what do you mean never went all in? He signed Peralta and Sabathia and Cliff, like all the Victor Martinez, all these guys signed long-term deals. Grady Seisman, Travis Hafner. I said, no, but they never had a year where they're like, okay, we can win the World Series this year. Let's go out and do it. And right now, the Indians are doing that, not just by signing Encarnacion, which was a huge part of it, but then by bringing in Joe Smith and bringing in Jay Bruce. Those are moves.
Counts that too.
What?
Boone
Logan. Well, Andrew Miller counts more because they started doing this last year. So
right,
going back to last year, they brought in not just guys. They didn't just bring in some dude. They didn't go get Asdrubal Cabrera. They got Jay Bruce.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big difference there. It wasn't just some nostalgia pickup. It wasn't just somebody to get somebody. They made moves. Well, but he's still a good reliever, especially against righties.
Right, but I mean, that's my point. Like, a lot of people were saying originally that, they had to go out and they had to get a former Indian. That's what I mean. I even said this. It wouldn't be a trade.
Well, they needed
but they needed him. It wasn't just a sentimental pickup. They needed him.
They needed another reliever, especially with Miller out right now.
Right.
They need all the depth they can get. Although he's supposed to be back.
Miller looked great. I saw him on MILB TV tonight. He looked great.
Okay, he's supposed to be back on Friday. But this is what going all in looks like. This is not playing for next year. This is not playing for the window. This is playing to win this season. Just like last year. They played to win last season. And Mark Shapiro never in his life played to win one season. He always played the long game. He always said, well, we want to have the longest window possible, which is great. But this is how you increase your chance of winning a World Series. And I think the Indians do have still a great chance of winning a World Series.
As long as they're healthy, they absolutely do. And they didn't sacrifice their window this year. I mean, you could argue they definitely took a hit depth-wise in pitching, because I don't think they have a lot of great starting pitching options in the minor leagues behind Tristan McKenzie, at least as far as guys who aren't back-end arms. Justice Sheffield was only one, and then you can count Clint Frazier, and then, Ben Heller and Feyereisen are good relief prospects, but, they didn't compromise the future this deadline. They went out and got a piece they needed in Joe Smith, and then they went out and got a piece they needed in Jay Bruce, and they did not compromise 2018 or 2019 or 2020 at all. I mean,
we're going to miss
Ryan. Even if Ryder Ryan goes out and ends up being a freaking all-star closer, they still didn't sacrifice.
You stepped on it.
Next year. What?
I was going to say, pour one out for Ryder Ryan.
Pour one out because he won't get his World Series ring? Yeah.
Pour one out for Ryder Ryan. We're going to miss that guy.
Yeah.
If you want to know more about Ryder Ryan, I just wrote a whole thing up on Burner for Baseball about him and Sanaj Thomas. and it's got a misleading title about that's like position players that don't rake or something like that. But it's about pitchers who used to beat hitters. Check that out. Check out Justin's piece on it on Ajax. Let's just call it Ajax. Ajax Francis, and you get that reference.
Ajax, yes, that's a Cleveland
Francis.
reference.
No, Francis.
No, I did not get the Francis reference.
Jesus Christ. It's from Deadpool.
Don't do Deadpool either, sorry. Probably a good place to end this.
Okay. Have a good one. We'll see you next week. I love my calendar, girl.